this video, I'm going to talk about how to calculate your training zones and some tips for keeping things easier than perhaps you normally would. Zone 1 training is important to do throughout the year, but it is particularly important during the early season build-up. Yes, I am a strong believer in establishing a good base. To quote, "An established endurance base built from reasonably high volumes of training may be an important precondition for tolerating and responding well to a substantial increase in training intensity over the short term." I will also add that in order to improve as an athlete, it is important to spend time training in all of these zones. When and how much depends on where you are in your training cycle, what you are training for, and to some degree your level of fitness and training experience. As I mentioned, there are a number of different training zone schemes out there. The most basic being this 3-zone scheme. The most accurate way to measure this is to find a physiology lab and have your lactate and or your oxygen uptake measured in response to increasing workloads. This is the method I prefer when available. I have done lots of these tests on all kinds of athletes, mostly runners, cyclists, and mountain bikers, but also on swimmers, rowers, Nordic combined athletes, and even race walkers. Yes, race walking is a bit of a weird sport, but could you walk at a 6-minute per mile pace? I didn't think so. You do need someone who is relatively experienced at doing this test and who uses correct techniques and the appropriate protocol. In the absence of doing this test, you can go by perceived exertion, or you can do a field test to determine your threshold heart rate or pace or watts at threshold. The test that I have my athletes do is a 30-minute time trial where you go as hard as you can for 30 minutes. You would then measure your average heart rate for the final 20 minutes of the 30-minute time trial. You can, of course, do this either for running, cycling, or swimming, but you should do it in the mode of sport you are training for, i.e. don't use your biking heart rate for your running zones, as they will likely be different. I prefer to do my tests on an incline. This is because I live in Colorado, and Colorado is not flat. But if most of your training is flat, then do it on a flat course. You can also do it on an indoor trainer or treadmill. Again, keep it specific to what you do and use in training. Once you have established your average heart rate, then I use these calculations to calculate the various zones. Thus, your zone 1 heart rate or load would be at 80% of your average heart rate or lower. Zone 2 would be at 80 to 95%, and so on. In this example, for an average time trial heart rate of 155, for a recovery or zone 1 workout, I would have this person stay below 124. Some schemes further divide zone 2 into zones 2 and 2 plus. Zone 2 plus, or the high end of zone 2, is often the intensity that athletes will default to. It is also known as the black hole of training. I will have my athletes do some training here, but only when they are transitioning from lots of zone 1 and 2 training into more zone 3 and race-specific training. To measure heart rate, I am a fan of using a heart rate chest strap and a reliable watch like Garmin. The wrist heart rate measurement just doesn't work for me. Maybe it has something to do with having a small wrist. Using a chest strap might feel uncomfortable at first, but you do get used to it. Once I have determined my heart rate zones, I can then enter these into a training platform like Training Peaks. Having heart rate data helps in a number of ways. It allows Training Peaks to more accurately assess training load, like your training stress score or TSS, or your cumulative training load like CTL. It also allows Training Peak to calculate what percentage of time is spent in the various zones. Typically like my athletes to spend 2 to 3 months doing higher volumes in zone 1 and the lower end of zone 2. Once they are comfortable with a higher volume, then I gradually shift to doing more efforts in the solid zone 2 and even zone 2 plus. Now I just want to acknowledge that heart rate is affected by various things such as heat, fatigue, dehydration, duration of the workout, and so on. Thus, use it as a tool to inject some discipline into your workouts, but don't be a slave to it either. I also pay attention to rating of perceived exertion, or RPE. There are 2 types of RPE that I pay attention to. Central RPE, such as breathing and heart rate, and peripheral RPE, such as how my legs are feeling. So my heart rate might be a bit higher on a climb on my leg if it feels easy. There are also times when my RPE feels high, but my heart rate is low. This usually means that my legs are fatigued and I need to go easy that day. So here are some tips for zones 1 and 2 training. Number 1, it really takes a lot of discipline not to let the effort creep into that somewhat hard zone. So the first tip is that you need to check your ego at the door. If that person holding a 30-pound child in the baby trailer passes you, just let it go. Ignore that competitive impulse and save it for a race day. Besides, they're probably using an e-bike anyway. At least that is what you can tell yourself. Number 2, think about your training in the context of your total training load. If you really want to improve your performance over time as an athlete, then the best way to get there is to be consistent with your training over time. It is that day in and day out training effort that will pay off in the long run. Crushing that one workout is great, but the ability to train consistently over the course of weeks and months is where it counts. This is one reason why, even for the hard workouts, I like to do them with control and not completely bury myself. I want to be able to train again the next day and the next and the next. I tend to save burying myself for those important races. Number 3, be careful who you train with. If you need to go easy, then don't train with people that are faster than you. Hopefully this is self-evident. Number 4, for the recovery workouts, keep them flat or do them on a treadmill or trainer where it is easier to control the effort. If you are in a hilly environment, then walk the uphills just to keep from going too hard. Number 5, if you don't have a heart rate monitor, or even if you do, going at conversational pace is a good guide. Another good guide is whether you could do the workout by breathing through your nose and not through your mouth. If you can't breathe through your nose at all, then you're going too hard. Or you might just have a stuffy nose. Number 6, don't try to maintain a zone 2 heart rate, for example. Pushing it on the downhills, particularly when you run, can be quite stressful. Now, an exception to this might be if you're training a lot at altitude, but more on that in another video. Number 7, err on the side of easier rather than harder. This is especially important when you're building up your volume. It is even more important when you're doing a recovery workout. As I said in the previous video, you can't really go easy enough when doing a recovery run or ride. Number 8, be patient with the process. It can take 2 to 3 months to really build up your aerobic base. Improvements in performance are the result of accumulated months and years of appropriate training with gradual and carefully planned progressive overload. Number 9, maintain good form or technique. Just because you are going easy doesn't mean you go lazy. This is especially true for more skill-dependent sports like Nordic skiing or swimming. If you find these videos helpful, please like and subscribe. Feel free to comment or ask questions below. In the next video, I will talk about altitude training. A, is it helpful? And B, some tweaks I make to my training while living at 9,000 feet. Tot ziens, and see you next time.